The history of South Africa is a fascinating journey that spans thousands of years, encompassing the rise and fall of ancient cultures, colonial conquest, the struggles against oppression, and the eventual establishment of a modern democratic state. To fully understand South Africa's history, we must begin with its earliest inhabitants and trace the development of its societies over time. South Africa's past is complex, marked by both immense tragedy and incredible resilience, shaping the nation we know today. South Africa's history begins with the early hunter-gatherer societies of the San people, also known as the Bushmen, who lived in the region for tens of thousands of years. These indigenous communities were later joined by the Khoikhoi, a pastoralist group, creating a shared culture that relied on the land for survival. Evidence of their presence can be found in the remarkable rock art that adorns caves and shelters across the country, depicting scenes of daily life, spiritual beliefs, and interaction with animals. These early communities lived in harmony with the environment, developing sophisticated knowledge of plants, wildlife, and the changing seasons. Around 2,000 years ago, Bantu-speaking peoples began migrating into the region from Central and East Africa, bringing with them ironworking technology, agriculture, and cattle herding. These migrations significantly shaped the demographic and cultural landscape of South Africa. As Bantu communities established settlements, cultivated crops, and raised livestock, the ancestors of many of today's South Africans, including the Zulu, Xhosa, Sotho, and Swana peoples, trace their roots back to these early Bantu-speaking migrants. Over centuries, they developed vibrant societies, each with its own language, traditions, and governance structures. In 1488, the first European contact with South Africa occurred when Portuguese explorer Bartolomeu Dias sailed around the southern tip of Africa, which he named the Cape of Storms, later renamed the Cape of Good Hope. This marked the beginning of South Africa's integration into global trade routes, as European powers sought new sea routes to Asia. However, it wasn't until 1652 that European settlement began in earnest, when the Dutch East India Company established a refreshment station at the Cape of Good Hope. Led by Jan van Riebeeck, this settlement was initially intended to resupply ships traveling between Europe and Asia, but quickly expanded as Dutch settlers, or Afrikaners, established farms and began to interact, and often clash, with the indigenous Khoikhoi and San populations. The expansion of European settlement brought profound changes to the region. The introduction of European farming techniques and livestock, combined with the displacement of indigenous communities, led to significant social and economic upheaval. The Khoikhoi were particularly affected, as their traditional way of life was disrupted by the encroachment of settlers. Many were forced into servitude or displaced from their lands. Over time, the Cape Colony grew in size and influence, attracting settlers from various European countries, including France and Germany, many of whom were Protestant refugees known as Huguenots. In the early 19th century, British forces seized control of the Cape Colony during the Napoleonic Wars, marking the beginning of a new era in South African history. The British introduced policies that further marginalized indigenous peoples and clashed with the Dutch-speaking Afrikaner population. One significant point of contention was the British abolition of slavery in 1834, which Afrikaner farmers, known as Boers, heavily relied upon for labor. In response, many Boers embarked on the Great Trek, a mass migration inland to escape British rule and establish independent republics. This movement led to the establishment of the Boer republics, such as the Orange Free State and the South African Republic, Transvaal. The 19th century also saw significant conflicts between indigenous African kingdoms and European settlers. One of the most notable events was the Mfecane, or crushing, a period of widespread chaos and warfare among African communities in the early 1800s. This upheaval was partly driven by the rise of the Zulu kingdom under King Shaka, who implemented military reforms and expansionist policies that reshaped the political landscape of southern Africa. The Zulu kingdom became a dominant force, but its clashes with both neighboring African groups and European settlers eventually weakened its power. The discovery of diamonds in Kimberley in 1867 and gold on the Witwatersrand in 1886 transformed South Africa's economy and intensified European interest in the region. These mineral discoveries attracted fortune seekers from around the world and led to the rapid industrialization of South Africa. However, they also exacerbated tensions between the British and the Boers, culminating in the Anglo-Boer Wars. The First Anglo-Boer War, 1880 to 1881, ended in a Boer victory, preserving their independence. But the Second Anglo-Boer War, 1899 to 1902, resulted in British victory and the incorporation of the Boer republics into the British Empire. The aftermath of the Second Anglo-Boer War saw the establishment of the Union of South Africa in 1910, a self-governing dominion of the British Empire. This new political entity unified the Cape Colony, Natal, Transvaal, and the Orange Free State, but entrenched racial segregation and disenfranchisement of the black majority. Policies such as the 1913 Natives Land Act restricted land ownership for black South Africans, forcing many into wage labor on farms and in mines. These policies laid the groundwork for the apartheid system that would dominate South Africa's 20th century history. Apartheid, an Afrikaans word meaning separateness, was officially implemented in 1948 when the National Party came to power. This system of institutionalized racial segregation divided South Africans into racial categories: white, black, colored, and Indian, and restricted the rights of non-white citizens. Under apartheid, black South Africans were forced to live in designated homelands, denied access to quality education and health care, and excluded from political participation. Resistance to apartheid was met with brutal repression, including arrests, torture, and killings. Despite the oppressive nature of apartheid, resistance movements persisted. The African National Congress, ANC, founded in 1912, became a leading force in the struggle for equality, organizing protests, strikes, and campaigns against discriminatory laws. Leaders like Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, and Oliver Tambo emerged as prominent figures in the fight against apartheid. The 1960 Sharpeville Massacre, where police killed 69 unarmed protesters, and the 1976 Soweto Uprising, led by students protesting against Afrikaans as the medium of instruction, galvanized international condemnation of apartheid. International pressure played a crucial role in dismantling apartheid. Countries around the world imposed economic sanctions and cultural boycotts on South Africa, while anti-apartheid activists abroad raised awareness of the injustices faced by black South Africans. Within the country, mass mobilization, strikes, and armed resistance by groups like Umkhonto we Sizwe, the armed wing of the ANC, continued to challenge the apartheid regime. The turning point came in the late 1980s and early 1990s, when a combination of internal resistance and international pressure forced the apartheid government to negotiate with anti-apartheid leaders. In 1990, Nelson Mandela was released from prison after 27 years, signaling the beginning of a new era. Talks between the government and the ANC led to the dismantling of apartheid laws and the country's first democratic elections in 1994. Nelson Mandela became South Africa's first black president, ushering in a new era of reconciliation and nation-building. Since the end of apartheid, South Africa has made significant progress in addressing the inequalities of the past, but challenges remain. Issues such as poverty, unemployment, and inequality persist. while corruption and political instability have tested the resilience of South Africa's democracy. Despite these challenges, South Africa's history of overcoming adversity and its vibrant cultural diversity continue to inspire hope for a brighter future. In conclusion, the history of South Africa is a testament to the resilience of its people and their ability to overcome immense challenges. From the ancient hunter-gatherer societies to the struggle against apartheid and the establishment of a democratic nation, South Africa's journey is a remarkable story of survival, resistance, and renewal. Understanding this history helps us appreciate the complexities of South Africa today and the ongoing efforts to build a more just and equitable society.